All right, today we're going to talk about FDR and the New Deal. FDR becomes president in 1932. He's an ex-New York governor. He's a Democrat. He's really going to be a change from what was happening in the 1920s and all the Republican presidents that we had. Obviously, when we hit a Great Depression, we're going to probably want to change things up. So moving from the ultra-conservative to now a little bit more liberal, we're going to be FDR. So during the lame duck period, which is after FDR is elected and before he becomes president, he gets a group of his buddies together, and they call themselves the Brain Trust, and they create a plan of attack to bring back the U.S. economy. And what he ends up doing is he promises a new deal for the American people, where they're going to be try to get rid of all these problems of the Depression and offer this deal for everyone to become more successful. And so the three goals of the New Deal are relief, recovery, and reform. We're going to talk about each one of them. There's a lot of different organizations and groups and plans and acts that are created during the New Deal, and they all are a bunch of letters, 3 letters or 4 letters long, and we're going to have to try to keep these straight. So it's going to be quite difficult, but we'll try to get through most of it and see where we're at, and we'll do a lot of work in class about it. All right, so his first 100 days, he wants to really take action right away and show that he's willing to do something different and to change and make things better. So he passes more than 15 pieces of New Deal legislation in the first 100 days. That's a lot of work by Congress, and he does work with Congress to do this. He gets their support and gets them on board with what he wants. So the first thing that he does is he's going to try to reform society and reform the way that things are done, and particularly in the banking and financial sectors. So the first thing he does is he declares a bank holiday. It's the day after he takes office, and he closes all the banks. And what he's doing is he's trying to stop people from withdrawing all their money because this is really hurting the banks. It's making them close. There's all these thousands of banks are closing, and he needs to stop that. So in order to stop it, he closes the banks, and then he passes something called the Emergency Banking Relief Act. And this authorizes the Treasury Department to inspect the country's banks. Okay, banks that were suitable to open could open, but he wanted to make sure that you had trust and you had faith in your bank before it was open. So if the bank had enough currency on hand to reopen, then people would be willing to put their money back in the bank. So people, obviously, when the market crashed, were afraid to deposit money in the banks, and now this gives them a little bit more freedom and a little bit more trust in the banks and faith in the banks to put their money, because if they didn't want the banks to close, and then they just lose all their money. Okay, so we know that banking is really an important part of our financial structure, and we need to make sure that that is sound. Okay, some more reform. We have security, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and basically the SEC is there to regulate the stock market and make sure that nothing illegal is going on. If the stock market has a really, really bad day, they can close the stock market and make sure that it doesn't collapse totally like it did in 1929. They say it's illegal to rig the stock market with insider trading, so people have been busted for this. I believe Martha Stewart was busted for insider trading, and she went to jail. And insider trading is basically when you have knowledge of a stock, you shouldn't be able to give that knowledge to anyone else. So if I know that something really bad is going to happen to my company, I can't go tell a bunch of people, and then they can go sell their stocks and don't lose money. That's illegal. He also creates the Glass-Steagall Act, which creates the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporations. And this is really a good thing because it helps to instill faith in the banks again. There's a federal insurance for federal bank accounts up to $5,000, and that actually has gone up to $250,000 today. So if I have $5,000 in the bank, I know that I cannot lose that money because the government has backed it up, and they will make sure that I don't lose it. So if the bank goes under, they will pay me that money. So this reassures customers that their money was safe, and they have that faith to put the money back in the banks. No serious issues have ever come up to where they would actually need to do this. So the goal of reform is to restore consumer confidence in the banking system and so they could start depositing again. So we understand that creating a sound fiscal society is really important to making sure that our economy works well. And the next part is recovery. The first act that we're going to talk about is the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and this gives farmers money to produce less crops. And it seems kind of weird, but what they're doing is after World War II, we know that there's a collapse in the World War I, there's a collapse in the farm sector because people's farms are so big and they're producing so much it drives prices down. So what the government does is they say, here, take some money and then produce less. Okay, and it sounds like a really good deal. It's like, oh, we don't have to do as much work. We're going to get paid for the work we're not doing, and then the money that we have, or the crops that we do grow, are going to be sold at a higher rate because there's less of them. So as supply goes down, demand goes up, price goes up. So it's kind of a really good thing for the farms. Okay, the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Basically, in the Tennessee Valley, there's a lot of flooding going on. It's kind of backwoodsy. There's not that much electricity. People are pretty poor there. So what they do is they create a series of dams and power plants along the Tennessee River, and it's going to give people jobs to build the dams. It's going to give them money, and then it's going to give them electricity. So it's going to kind of bring them to the modern society. And then it also provides flood control so that the river doesn't overflow and flood people's land and homes. All right, and the third R is relief. Okay, we have the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay, this is going to put young men to work building roads, planting trees. It really shows FDR's passion for conservation, and they do a lot of work, planting plants to help try to like conserve the soil and clean the air and that sort of stuff. And it's aiming to prevent a dust bowl too. The cool thing was the people that were in the CCC would be taken away from their families. They give $30 a week, but they were forced to send the majority of it home, $25, so that their families could survive on that. And they were fed and housed in with their troops or their troop that was going out and working. So they didn't really need money to survive, and they would send the money back to their families. The next is the Public Works Administration, the PWA. Provided money to states to help construct community buildings, and this was really good because it creates a bunch of jobs really quickly, 4 million. And then we had Civil Works Administration, fairly similar. It creates 4 million new jobs in construction jobs, and also to help pay for school teachers to teach the children. All right, so people still needed more help, so this wasn't enough, so he starts putting more stuff through. So we have the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, which gives $500 million in food, clothes, shelter, and provides jobs for the unemployed, sick, and elderly. So this is more relief to just basically really immediately help people out. Then we have the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which provides new low-interest home loans to Americans struggling to make their payments. And these are people that are making their payments, but it's really tough for them. So they're not getting a handout. It's just lowering the interest rates to make the payments more plausible. And we go back to recovery. We have the NRA, the National Recovery Administration. Their symbol is the Blue Eagle, and it set a code of fair practice to businesses. So it promotes recovery by interrupting the trend of wage cuts, falling prices, and layoffs. So if you're a business that wants to help people out and wants to try to take a sacrifice to help people stay employed with high wages, you become a member, or your place of business would become a member of the NRA, and they would get a Blue Eagle flag to fly in their store, so people knew that they were supporting the people. So they weren't cutting wages, they weren't firing people, they were doing everything they could to maintain, and people would, and this in turn would convince people, or really try to bring people in to their businesses to do more business, because they knew they're practicing these fair practices to try to help people. So it was kind of good on both sides. Then we have the Federal Housing Administration. This is reform. It gave home loans to those with good credit and tight budgets to allow people to try to get homes. Having a home is a good way to be prosperous in society, and that's what they were attempting to do here. FDR tries to sell all these pieces of New Deal legislation to the people, and what he did is he did something called fireside chats, and Hoover did this as well. He would speak over the radio, but FDR had a really great speaking voice, and he was able to really kind of dumb the material down a little bit to make it more understandable to the people. So he would go over the radio and talk and explain in clear, simple language the New Deal measures, and the people really liked the informality of his speech, and they felt like they were talking directly to them, and they were able to understand what he's doing. He's just basically trying to convince the public of what the things that he's doing are good for these people, and he's really trying to help out. And people really liked him, and people would get around the radio, turn on the fire, and listen to it, and that's why they call it the fireside chats. And then the New Deal meets opposition. One big issue is deficit spending, and we've always deficit spent, not always at the numbers that we did during the New Deal, but we needed to do this. It was kind of a necessary evil. People really felt like deficit spending was a bad thing, but in a time of depression, when GDP starts to fall, we need to find a way to pick that back up. And when businesses and the private sector are not doing enough, the government does need to step in and spend money to try to pump the economy back up. And it's a safety net, and safety net's kind of a weird word because a safety net it kind of implies like catching someone when it's fallen, and it shouldn't really be a safety net. It should be more like a safety trampoline where once you hit the bottom, you kind of bounce back up, and it's going to kind of glide with you for a little bit, and once you kind of take over, you're going to go and kind of emerge out of that and be on your own again. Deficit spending, it's a hot topic, especially right now, us being over $17 trillion in debt, and a lot of people have problems with it. And that's where, the safety net has become more of a net these days than a trampoline. But people are really upset with the fact that we are spending so much money and going into debt. The Supreme Court strikes down the NIRA and the Agricultural Adjustment Act, saying that they're unconstitutional, that FDR has expanded his power too much. And FDR is kind of like, he's kind of over the fact that these people are going against his New Deal legislation, and what he does is he tries to create a court reform bill where he's going to appoint 6 new justices, so he can put 6 new people in. They're going to believe what he wants, and they're going to basically just be able to pass everything because they need a majority to pass. So people felt that he was abusing his power, but he got away with it because an elderly justice retired, so he's able to appoint someone else. So and then he was the president for so long that he was able to keep appointing his people, and he gets the majority that he needs, and this whole issue kind of goes away. Now, we talked about Huey Long. He was an early supporter of the New Deal, but he turns against FDR when he's running for president, and he created that Share Our Wealth campaign that we talked about, and then he was eventually assassinated by a lone gunman, and he kind of goes away, but he brought a lot of criticism towards FDR as well. So deficit spending was, a issue on the right. The conservatives believe that it was a wrong thing to do, and Huey Long was his opposition on the left, believing that he wasn't doing enough, that he wanted to complete socialism. So everyone's always going to get criticism, and he just had to kind of deal with that. All right, and we're going to stop there, and thank you.